The chrono read 22:47 when Sergeant Valen realized they were not alone. He had been watching the corridor for 3 hours without moving. His armor's autosenses tracked every flicker of shadow, every whisper of air displacement, every microscopic change in temperature. The space hulk drifted silent around them, a massive graveyard of fused ships spinning through the void. Somewhere in the twisted metal belly of this thing, his squad was supposed to locate a data core from the Blessed Covenant, extract it, and get out before the Hulk tumbled back into the warp. Simple. Routine. The kind of mission they had run a dozen times. Except the corridor ahead of him had just moved. Not collapsed. Not shifted from the Hulk's spin. Moved. Like something breathing. The walls contracted by perhaps half a meter, then expanded again. Valen's visor registered the change, tagged it as an anomaly, then cycled through error codes trying to explain what his eyes had just witnessed. Metal does not breathe. He opened a vox channel to his squad. Castian, you see that? Static answered him. Not the clean white noise of distance or interference. The static sounded wet, almost organic, like something choking on its own fluids. Valen switched channels. Morton, respond. More static. Underneath it, he thought he heard something else. A rhythm. Maybe voices. Maybe just the Hulk's ancient systems finally dying. He checked his auspex. According to the display, both squad members were 40 meters ahead, exactly where they should be. Their life signs registered normal. Heartbeat steady. Armor integrity holding. Everything looked fine on the readout, but Valen had not heard their voices in 6 minutes. That was wrong. Space Marines did not go silent during operations. They communicated constantly, updating positions, confirming targets, maintaining tactical awareness. 6 minutes of silence meant something had happened. Something bad enough that they could not speak or would not speak or had forgotten how to speak entirely. Valen moved forward, each step deliberate and controlled. His bolter swept the corridor in smooth arcs, tracking potential firing lanes. The Hulk's geometry made no sense here. Walls met at angles that should not exist. Corridors branched in directions that violated basic three-dimensional space. He had been inside space hulks before, knew how ships fused together created impossible architecture, but this felt different. This felt intentional. The temperature dropped as he advanced. Frost began forming along the edges of his visor. He checked the external climate reading. -32 degrees. That made no sense either. Space hulks were cold, yes, but internal corridors retained some heat from reactors, life support, residual energy. This cold felt active, aggressive, like something pushing against the warmth of his armor. He found Castian at the intersection. The Space Marine stood perfectly still, facing a bulkhead door. His bolter hung loose in one hand, barrel pointed at the floor. His posture looked wrong. Too relaxed. Too casual. Valen had served with Castian for 16 years and had never seen him stand like that during a mission. "Brother," Valen said quietly. Castian did not respond. Valen moved closer, keeping his weapon ready. "Castian, acknowledge." Still nothing. When Valen reached him, he saw why. Castian's helmet display was dark. Not damaged. Not offline. Just dark, as though someone had switched off every system simultaneously. Through the visor, Valen could see Castian's eyes. They were open, staring at the bulkhead, unblinking. Valen grabbed his shoulder and shook him. The armor felt heavier than it should, as if the ceramite had doubled in density. "Castian!" The other Marine's head turned slowly. Too slowly. The movement reminded Valen of a servitor responding to a command, mechanical and empty. Castian's eyes focused on him, and for a moment Valen saw recognition there. Then Castian smiled. Space Marines did not smile like that. The expression belonged on a different face, something that had studied human expressions but did not quite understand them. The smile stretched too wide, revealed too many teeth, held for too many seconds without blinking. "It showed me," Castian whispered. His voice sounded wrong. The tone shifted mid-sentence, as though multiple people were speaking through his throat at slightly different pitches. Valen stepped back, raising his bolter. "What showed you?" "Report." Castian's smile widened further. The ship, the beautiful ship, it has been waiting so long, brother. Waiting for us. It knew we would come. Prepared gifts. That was not Castian talking. Not anymore. Valen triggered his Vox, cycling through every channel, every frequency, trying to reach anyone outside this corridor. He got static on all of them, that same wet choking sound, and underneath it that rhythm that might have been voices. Where is Morton? Valen demanded. Castian tilted his head, the movement jerky and unnatural. Morton saw. He understood. He is with the ship now. You will understand too, brother. When you see what it wants to show you. Valen's training took over. Compromised squad member. Possible warp corruption. Immediate threat to mission integrity. He should have fired. Should have put a bolt round through Castian's helmet and worried about explanations later. But he hesitated. 16 years of service. 16 years of fighting beside this man, trusting him with his life, watching him hold the line when everything else fell apart. That history made his finger freeze on the trigger for just 1 second too long. Castian moved. The speed shocked Valen. One moment Castian stood motionless, still smiling that horrible smile. The next he had crossed the distance between them. One hand locked around Valen's wrist, forcing the bolter aside. The strength in that grip felt wrong, far beyond what even enhanced physiology should allow. Valen slammed his helmet forward, connecting with Castian's visor. The impact should have staggered him, maybe cracked the faceplate. Instead, Castian just laughed. The sound echoed strangely in the corridor, bouncing off walls that seemed closer than they had been moments before. You will see, Castian hissed. The ship wants you to see. Valen drove his knee into Castian's midsection, twisted free, brought his bolter up. But Castian was already moving again, impossibly fast, and then something hit Valen from behind. He went down hard, his armor grinding against the deck. His helmet display lit up with damage warnings, proximity alerts, threat assessments all cycling too quickly to read. He rolled, trying to get his weapon oriented, but something pinned his arm. Not Castian. Morton knelt on Valen's wrist, his weight driving the armor into the deck plating. Blood covered Morton's helmet, dried and flaking, and through the cracked visor Valen could see his eyes. They looked empty, like someone had scooped out everything human and replaced it with something else. We found it, Morton whispered, his voice carrying that same multi-toned quality. The heart of the ship. It beats, brother. It remembers. It wants to show you what it remembers. Valen activated his armor's emergency protocols, flooding his system with combat stimulants. His hearts hammered faster, adrenaline sharpening his thoughts. He had perhaps 3 seconds before they overwhelmed him completely. He stopped fighting. The sudden lack of resistance surprised them, just for an instant. Their grips loosened slightly, and in that fraction of a second Valen triggered his armor's full power, surging upward with every servo and muscle fiber contracting simultaneously. He broke free, staggered backward, brought his bolter up and fired. The bolt round caught Morton in the shoulder, detonating on impact. The explosion tore through ceramite and flesh, spinning him sideways into the bulkhead. Valen did not wait to see if it stopped him. He turned and ran. The corridor behind him had changed. Where there had been a straight passage, now there were doors. Dozens of them, lining both walls, each one slightly different. Some looked like standard Imperial hatches. Others were clearly Xenos in origin. A few appeared to be made from materials that hurt to look at directly, their surfaces writhing with patterns that made his autosenses scream warnings. He picked a direction and sprinted, his armor systems calculating the fastest route back to the insertion point. The auspex showed nothing but static now, the friendly markers for his squad flickering in and out of existence across impossible distances. Behind him he heard footsteps, heavy, measured, getting closer. Valen risked a glance backward and immediately wished he had not. Castian and Morton were following him, but they were not running. They walked with that same casual posture, completely unhurried, as though they had all the time in the universe. And the corridor was bending to accommodate them, walls shifting and flowing like liquid, shortening the distance with each step they took. He would not outrun them. Not like this. Valen stopped, turned, and opened fire. His bolter roared in the enclosed space, each shot placed with precision honed by decades of combat. He aimed for joints, weak points, anywhere that might slow them down without killing them outright. The rounds connected, armor shattered, flesh tore, but neither of them fell. Morton's ruined shoulder leaked blood that looked too dark, too thick. Castian had taken 3 rounds to the chest, and through the holes in his armor Valen could see something moving underneath, something that was definitely not organs or bone. They kept walking. Valen's bolter clicked empty. He dropped the magazine, slammed in a fresh one, fired again. The pattern repeated. Empty. Reload. Fire. The corridor filled with smoke and the sharp chemical stink of propellant. Still they came. When his bolter finally ran dry for the last time, Valen drew his combat knife. The blade felt insignificant in his hand, a toy compared to the threats he had faced, but it was all he had left. Castian stopped 3 meters away, that smile still fixed on his face. Why do you resist, brother? The ship only wants to share. It has been alone so long, drifting, waiting. It found something in the dark, something that taught it new ways to exist. Now it wants to teach us. That is not the ship talking, Valen said, his voice steady despite everything. That is the warp, corruption. Whatever is inside you, it is not of the Emperor. Castian's head tilted again, that jerky servitor motion. The Emperor. Yes, we remember him. The ship remembers. It was born in his wars, christened in the forges of Mars, blessed by his priests, sent to fight in his name. Thousands of souls lived and died within its hull. Their dreams soaked into the walls. Their fears bled into the metal. And when the warp took it, when reality tore open and swallowed it whole, all those dreams and fears became something new. Valen's grip tightened on his knife. You are corrupted. Both of you. I will not let it spread. Spread. Morton's voice came from behind him. Valen spun, but Morton stood exactly where he had been before, still bleeding that too dark blood. How had his voice come from behind? We are not a disease, brother. We are an awakening. The ship wants to show you what it learned in the dark between stars. The truths that exist outside the Emperor's light. The corridor was definitely smaller now. The walls had moved inward while Valen was distracted, closing like a throat preparing to swallow. The doors that lined the passage were opening one by one, revealing chambers beyond. In those chambers, Valen saw things that made his training falter. He saw the blessed Covenant crew, or what remained of them. Dozens of people fused into the walls, their bodies stretched and warped, faces frozen in expressions that might have been agony or ecstasy. They were still alive. He could see them breathing, could see their eyes tracking his movement. Some of them were trying to speak, mouths working silently, and Valen realized they were all saying the same thing. Join us. See what we see. Understand. He looked away, but there were more chambers, more horrors. Servitors that had grown organic components, flesh sprouting from mechanical joints. Machine spirits that had developed something like consciousness, trapped in their systems and screaming in binary. Equipment and weapons that moved on their own, responding to commands no one had given. The Space Hulk was not dead. It had never been dead. It was transforming. You see it now, Castian said softly. The ship is becoming something new, something that exists between the material and immaterial. It learned patience in the warp, learned subtlety. It does not want to destroy. It wants to create, to grow, to spread across the galaxy one visitor at a time, teaching them what it learned, sending them home to share the gift. Valen's mind raced through his options. His weapons were gone. His squad was compromised. His Vox was dead. The insertion point was somewhere in this twisting labyrinth, assuming it still existed at all. He had no backup, no support, no way to call for extraction. He had nothing except his training and his faith. He closed his eyes and began to pray. Not the formal litanies taught by chaplains. Not the battle prayers recited before every mission. Just simple words, spoken from the heart. Emperor, if you can hear me in this place, I need your guidance. I am lost. I am alone. I do not know if I can resist what is happening here. But I will try. I will hold to my oaths for as long as strength remains. When he opened his eyes, Castian and Morton were closer. Close enough to touch. Their smiles had faded, replaced by something that might have been confusion. Why do you cling to him? Castian asked. The Emperor is far away. So far. His light does not reach here. The Astronomicon is just a whisper in this dark. He cannot help you. Maybe not, Valen said. But my faith is mine. Not the ship's. Not yours. Mine. And I will not surrender it. He struck. The combat knife was not designed to pierce Space Marine armor. It was a tool, a backup weapon, something to use when everything else had failed. But Valen had spent decades learning exactly where every plate met, every seal joined, every vulnerable point existed. He drove the blade into the gap between Castian's helmet and gorget, twisted, and pulled. Blood sprayed, real blood this time, and Castian stumbled backward. The smile was gone completely now, replaced by something like shock. Valen did not wait. He spun toward Morton, feinted high, went low, and slammed his shoulder into the other Marine's damaged joint. The ruined armor gave way, and Morton went down hard. Then Valen ran. Not away from them, toward them, past them, into the corridor beyond, deeper into the Hulk's twisting geometry. It made no tactical sense, but tactics had failed. Logic had failed. Everything he had been trained to rely on had proven useless against whatever corruption had taken root here. So he abandoned logic and followed instinct. The corridors blurred around him. Doors opened and closed. The walls breathed. The deck plating rippled like water. Voices whispered from the vents, offering knowledge, promising understanding, begging him to stop and listen. He ignored all of it and ran. His armor's chronometer marked time in fractions of seconds. 22:59. 2300 hours. 2301. The night was slipping away, and he had no idea how much longer he could maintain this pace. His enhanced physiology could run for days without rest, but the Space Hulk seemed infinite, and infinity could exhaust even a Space Marine. At 2317, he found something different. A chamber, small, barely large enough for 3 people. The walls here looked almost normal, standard Imperial construction, unpolluted by the corruption spreading through the rest of the Hulk. A single lumoglobin strip provided dim yellow light, and in the center of the chamber stood a child. Valen stopped so abruptly he nearly fell. His armor's momentum carried him forward several steps before the servos could compensate. He stared at the impossible figure, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. A child, perhaps 8 years old, dressed in a simple gray smock, bare feet on the cold deck plating. Clean, unmarked, perfectly ordinary except for the fact that no child should exist on this Hulk, in this place at this time. The child looked up at him with dark eyes. Are you lost? Valen's training screamed warnings. Possible hallucination. Possible warp manifestation. Possible trap. But beneath the warnings, something else whispered. A memory. A fragment of his life before the chapter claimed him, before he became an Astartes, before he forgot what it meant to be simply human. He had been a child once. Had stood in a room not unlike this one, waiting for someone to come. He could not remember who. Could not remember why. The memory conditioning had taken those details, replacing them with oaths and doctrine. But he remembered the feeling. Being alone. Being scared. Being small in a universe too vast to comprehend. Yes, Valen admitted. I am lost. The child smiled. Not the horrible stretched smile of Castian, but something genuine. Me too. I have been lost here for a long time. I think I died. I am not sure. Time is strange in this place. You should not be here, Valen said carefully. This Hulk is dangerous. I know. I tried to leave, but the doors do not go anywhere anymore. They just lead to more rooms, and the rooms keep changing. I think the ship is dreaming. I think we are all inside its dream. Valen knelt slowly, bringing himself closer to the child's eye level. His armor's joints whined softly. "What is your name?" "Kara. I was crew on the Meridian Star. Engineering support. We got pulled into the warp during a translation. I remember screaming. Then I remember waking up here." She paused, studying his armor. "You are a space marine. You are supposed to save people." "Yes. Can you save me?" The question hung in the air between them. Valen did not answer immediately. Could not answer, because the honest response was no. He could not save her. He could barely save himself. The corruption spreading through this hulk was beyond his ability to fight. He was one space marine alone with no weapons and no support. But lying to a child felt worse than dying. "I can try," he said finally. Kara's smile widened slightly. "That is more than anyone else has offered." She held out her hand. Small, fragile, so impossibly vulnerable compared to his armored gauntlet. Valen hesitated, then carefully clasped her hand in his. Her fingers were warm, real, not some warp trick or hallucination. Or if they were, the trick was good enough that Valen could not tell the difference. "Where do we go?" Kara asked. "Away from here, toward the insertion point. If we can find it, there is a shuttle waiting. We can leave this place. The ship will not let us leave. It wants to keep us. Then we will make it let us go." Kara considered this, her young face serious. "You sound very determined." "Determination is all I have left." She nodded as though this made perfect sense. "Okay, I will help. I know some of the corridors. The ship showed me things while I was dreaming. Secret ways. Paths it does not watch as carefully." Together they left the chamber. Valen kept Kara slightly behind him, using his body to shield her from whatever might come. The corridors beyond the chamber were different now. Narrower, darker. The walls had taken on an organic quality, ribbed and pulsing with a rhythm that matched a heartbeat. Kara navigated without hesitation, pointing to passages that looked identical to Valen but apparently held some significance she could perceive. They moved in silence, both aware that noise would attract attention they could not afford. At 2334, they heard the footsteps again. Castian and Morton were still following, still hunting. Their pace had not changed, that same measured walk, but now Valen could hear something else. More footsteps, dozens of them. The crew members fused into the walls were pulling themselves free, joining the hunt. The space hulk was mobilizing its resources, sending everything it had corrupted to reclaim the two escapees. "Faster," Valen urged. Kara broke into a run. Her bare feet slapped against the deck plating, the sound echoing weirdly in the confined space. Valen matched her pace easily, his armor servos compensating for the slower speed. They turned a corner and found themselves facing a junction. 5 passages branched off in different directions, each one identical, each one disappearing into darkness. Kara stopped, her breathing rapid. "I do not know which way. Choose. What if I choose wrong? Then we die. But we die trying." She stared at the passages, her young face creased in concentration. Then she pointed to the leftmost corridor. "That one feels less angry." Valen did not question her logic. They ran. The corridor sloped downward, forcing them to slow their pace to avoid falling. The walls here were different, covered in frost that sparkled in the dim light. Valen's armor registered dropping temperatures, down into ranges that would kill an unprotected human in minutes. Kara was shivering but still moving. "How are you alive?" Valen asked, genuinely curious. "The temperature should have killed you." "I told you. I think I died already. This might just be my ghost. Or a memory the ship is keeping. I am not sure it matters anymore." The philosophical implications of that statement were too vast to address while running for their lives. Valen filed it away and focused on the immediate problem: survival. At the bottom of the slope, they found a massive chamber. Valen recognized it immediately from the mission briefing. The Blessed Covenant's primary data core. Banks of ancient machinery lined the walls, their surfaces covered in ice and corrosion. In the center stood the main archive, a column of dark metal wrapped in cables and conduits. This was their objective. The reason they had come to this cursed hulk in the first place. We need to extract the data, Valen said. It contains information critical to the Imperium. Kara moved toward the archive without hesitation. Her small hands began working the ancient controls with unexpected familiarity. I can do this. I was trained on these systems. Before. While she worked, Valen positioned himself at the chamber entrance, watching the corridor behind them. The footsteps were getting closer. He could hear voices now, dozens of them, all speaking in that same multi-toned chorus. They were calling his name, promising him peace, offering him understanding. He ignored them and focused on his breathing. Controlled, measured. The training never left, even when everything else fell apart. Got it, Kara announced. She held up a small data crystal, its surface glowing faintly. Everything is here. Ship logs, crew manifests, navigational data. Everything you need. Valen took the crystal carefully, securing it in a sealed compartment on his armor. Good. Now we run. But Kara was staring past him, her eyes wide. They are here. Valen turned. The corridor was full of figures. Castian and Morton stood at the front, their damaged armor leaking that too dark blood. Behind them, the crew of the Blessed Covenant, or what remained of them. Some were partially fused to servitor components. Others had grown additional limbs, extra faces, modifications that defied biology and reason. And behind them all, the corridor itself was changing. The walls were closing in, forming a sealed barrier, trapping them in the chamber. Castian stepped forward, his movements more fluid now, as though he had fully adapted to whatever was controlling him. You have something that belongs to the ship, brother. Return it. No. Valen's voice was flat, final. You cannot escape. The ship has sealed all exits. You are trapped. But it is not too late to join us, to see what we have seen, to understand what waits beyond the veil. Valen looked at Kara. The child stood beside him, small and vulnerable, holding nothing but faith that he might somehow get her out of this nightmare. He thought about his chapter, his brothers, the oaths he had sworn. He thought about the Emperor, distant and unreachable, whose light supposedly guided humanity through the dark. He thought about a single night on a space hulk, and how sometimes a night could last forever. Then he smiled. Not Castian's horrible stretched grin, but something genuine, something human. I have a better idea, he said. He triggered his armor's self-destruct. The timer appeared on his visor. 30 seconds. Enough time to say what needed to be said. I am not giving the ship anything, Valen continued calmly. Not the data. Not myself. Not her. You want to understand? Here is your understanding. Some things are worth dying for. Some lines cannot be crossed. Some corruptions cannot be tolerated. Castian's expression shifted, confusion replacing the smile. You would destroy yourself? For what? For data? For a ghost child who might not even be real? For principle? For duty? For the simple fact that I am still human enough to choose. 15 seconds. Kara tugged at his armor. What are you doing? Keeping my promise. I said I would try to save you. This is the only way left. But you will die. Yes, but I will die as myself. Not as whatever they have become. 10 seconds. The corrupted crew surged forward, realizing what was about to happen. Castian sprinted, moving with inhuman speed, reaching for the data crystal. Valen met him halfway, driving his armored fist into Castian's chest with enough force to crack ceramite. They went down together, grappling on the chamber floor. Morton joined them, along with several of the corrupted crew. They piled on top of Valen, trying to tear open his armor, trying to reach the sealed compartment where the data crystal rested. 5 seconds. Valen wrapped his arms around as many of them as he could, holding them close, making sure they would be caught in the blast radius. 3 seconds. Kara was running now, heading for a gap in the walls that had not existed moments before. The ship was opening an exit, trying to preserve at least one witness, one survivor who could carry its infection elsewhere. Valen hoped she would make it, hoped she would find her way to the shuttle, to safety, to whatever waited beyond this nightmare. 1 second. He whispered a final prayer, not to the Emperor, but to whoever might be listening in the dark. A prayer for the child he could not save, for the brothers he had lost, for everyone trapped in this Hulk's eternal dream. Then the timer reached 0. The explosion tore through the chamber with the force of a small sun. The blast wave vaporized everything within a 20-meter radius, melted the ice coating the walls, and sent shockwaves rippling through the Space Hulk structure. For a moment, the ship screamed. Not a sound, exactly, but a sensation that every living thing aboard felt in their bones. Pain, loss, rage. The corruption recoiled, pulling back from the blast site as though burned. And in that moment of recoil, something changed. The corridors stopped shifting. The walls stopped breathing. The voices went silent. Whatever consciousness had awakened within the Space Hulk was not dead, but it was wounded, and in its pain it released its grip on reality just enough for the dream to crack. Kara stumbled through the gap in the wall, coughing on smoke and dust. She had been far enough away to survive the blast, though the shockwave had thrown her against a bulkhead hard enough to crack ribs. She lay there for a moment, struggling to breathe, wondering if this was what dying felt like. Then she heard something that made her freeze. Footsteps, heavy, metallic, coming toward her. She looked up, expecting to see more of the corrupted crew, more of the ship's nightmares made manifest. Instead, she saw Space Marines, a full squad, advancing in combat formation, weapons ready. These ones looked different from Valen. Their armor bore different markings, different colors, but they moved with that same purpose, that same deadly grace. The squad leader knelt beside her, his helmet's vox grill crackling. "Are you injured?" Kara tried to speak, coughed up blood instead. She held up one hand, fingers clutched around something small. The Space Marine took it carefully, examining it in his gauntlet. The data crystal, intact, undamaged, exactly what they had come for. "Sergeant Valen?" the squad leader asked. Kara shook her head weakly. The Space Marine was silent for a moment. Then he stood, issuing rapid commands to his squad. They formed a defensive perimeter around her, weapons trained on the corridors beyond. "We are leaving," the squad leader announced. "Extraction in 3 minutes. The Hulk is destabilizing. Something damaged its core systems. We need to move now." They carried Kara to the insertion point, where a Thunderhawk waited with engines hot. She drifted in and out of consciousness during the extraction, catching fragments of conversation, pieces of status reports. The Space Hulk was dying. Valen's self-destruct had triggered a chain reaction in the ancient systems, causing power surges and structural failures. The corruption was collapsing inward, the ship's dream unraveling, everything that had been fused and warped beginning to separate. Whether it would truly die, or simply fall back into the warp to heal and try again, no one knew. Kara woke properly 3 days later in a Medicae bay aboard the battle barge Indomitable. The Medicae staff told her she had been in critical condition, multiple organ failures, severe trauma. They said it was a miracle she survived. She did not feel miraculous. She felt empty. A chaplain visited her on the 4th day. He wore black armor decorated with sacred symbols, and his presence filled the small medical chamber with a weight that had nothing to do with his physical size. "Child," he said gently, "tell me what happened on that Hulk." So she told him. Everything. The corridors that changed. The voices in the dark. The crew fused into walls. Sergeant Valen, who had found her and tried to save her. The final sacrifice. All of it. The chaplain listened without interruption. When she finished, he was silent for a long time. "Sergeant Valen's remains were not recovered," he said finally. "The explosion left nothing identifiable, but we found evidence of his last stand. Scorching patterns, blast radius, the positions of enemy casualties. He sold his life dearly." "He died to save me," Kara whispered. "A Space Marine died to save someone like me. Not someone like you. You, specifically. Because in that moment, protecting you mattered more than surviving. That is what it means to serve. to understand that some things transcend personal preservation. Will you remember him? His name will be inscribed in the chapter's Book of the Fallen. His deeds will be recorded. His sacrifice will not be forgotten. The chaplain paused. And you will remember him too. That may be the more important legacy. Kara spent 6 weeks recovering before the Medici cleared her for light duty. The chapter offered her a position as civilian crew, maintaining equipment and assisting with logistical operations. She accepted. She had nowhere else to go. At night, when the ship cycled to sleep hours and the corridors grew quiet, Kara sometimes dreamed of the Space Hulk. Of corridors that breathed and walls that shifted. Of voices calling from the dark, promising understanding. But she also dreamed of Sergeant Vallon, kneeling in a small chamber, offering his hand to a lost child, choosing humanity over survival, holding the line even when the line meant nothing, because holding it was what made him more than just a weapon. She wondered if he had been afraid at the end, if doubt had crept in during those final seconds, if he had questioned whether his sacrifice would matter, whether anyone would remember, whether dying for principle was worth the cost. She hoped not. She hoped he had gone to his death with the same calm determination he had shown throughout their brief time together. Because if a space marine could doubt, could falter, could break under the pressure of impossible choices, then what hope did anyone else have? 6 months after the extraction, the Indomitable received a priority Vox transmission from Segmentum Command. The data recovered from the Space Hulk had proven invaluable. Ancient navigational charts, long-lost shipping routes, information about warp storms and safe passages that could save months of travel time. The mission was declared a success. Awards were issued. Commendations recorded. The chapter received additional resources and priority assignments as recognition for their service. None of it mentioned Kara. None of it acknowledged the child who had navigated the corridors, who had extracted the data, who had carried it to safety. That did not bother her. She had not done it for recognition. She had done it because Sergeant Vallon had believed she could, had trusted her with something important, had died protecting her right to try. That was enough. Years later, when Kara was older and serving as a senior logistics coordinator, she sometimes told the story to new crew members. Young people, fresh from training, eager to serve but uncertain what service actually meant. She told them about a single night on a Space Hulk, about corridors that changed and darkness that lived, about a space marine who could have saved himself but chose instead to save someone else. Some of them listened. Some dismissed it as exaggeration or myth, but a few understood what she was really saying. That duty was not about glory or recognition. That service meant making impossible choices with no guarantee of success. That sometimes the only victory available was simply refusing to surrender, even when surrender made more sense. And that humanity's defense did not depend on weapons or ships or strategic brilliance. It depended on people willing to hold the line when the line could not be held, to fight when fighting was futile, to sacrifice when sacrifice was all that remained. Those were the ones who would survive the galaxy's horrors, not because they were stronger or smarter or better equipped, but because they understood what Sergeant Vallon had understood in his final moments, that being human was not about biology or genetics or origin. It was about choice. The choice to care when caring was dangerous. The choice to protect when protection was impossible. The choice to die as yourself rather than live as something else. The Space Hulk, wherever it drifted in the warp's endless currents, might remember that night differently, might preserve the memory of the Marine who wounded it, who forced it to release its grip, who proved that even its nightmares could be resisted. Or it might have forgotten entirely, absorbed the experience into its corrupted dreams, adding one more fragment to the infinite nightmare it had become. Either way, the Hulk would drift on, waiting, patient, ready to ensnare the next curious explorers who ventured too close. But Kara remembered, and she made sure others remembered too, because memory was its own kind of resistance, a refusal to let the darkness claim everything, a small light preserved against the void. And sometimes, in a galaxy drowning in war and horror and despair, a small light was all you had. It was enough. The years that followed taught Kara things the Imperium schools never could. She learned that heroism looked different up close than it did in propaganda vids. She learned that Space Marines bled and doubted and died just like everyone else, they just did it more stubbornly. And she learned that memory was fragile, that without constant tending it would fade like morning frost under a rising sun. So she tended it. Every year on the anniversary of that night, Kara requested a private chapel aboard whatever vessel she was serving on. She would sit in the silence for exactly 30 seconds, the same amount of time Valen's self-destruct timer had counted down. 30 seconds that had changed everything. During those 30 seconds, she did not pray. The Emperor had never answered her prayers on the Space Hulk. Instead, she simply remembered. The weight of Valen's gauntlet holding her hand. The sound of his breathing through the Vox grill. The way he had knelt to meet her eyes, treating her like a person worth saving rather than collateral damage. Other crew members thought her ritual was strange. A remembrance for a Space Marine she had known for less than an hour. But they did not understand. Those minutes had contained more truth about the Imperium than all the years before or after. She was 23 when she met her second Space Marine. His name was Brother Librarian Theron, and he came to the Indomitable searching for information about psychic phenomena associated with Space Hulks. Someone in the archives mentioned that a civilian crew member had survived an extended exposure to warp corruption aboard a Hulk. That person was Kara. Theron found her in the logistics bay, reviewing supply manifests for the upcoming campaign. He stood in the doorway for a moment before speaking, his psychic hood casting strange shadows in the artificial light. "You are Kara," he said. Not a question. She looked up from her data slate. Theron's armor was different from Valen's, marked with arcane symbols and purity seals. His eyes glowed with a faint inner light that made her instinctively uncomfortable. I need to ask you about the night you spent aboard the Space Hulk designated Mortis Concatenation. Specifically about the corruption you witnessed." Kara set down her data slate carefully. "Why?" "Because the Hulk has been sighted again. 3 systems away from where you encountered it. Survived. Healed. And now it is active once more, pulling ships from the warp, claiming crews. We need to understand what we are facing." The news hit her like a physical blow. She had hoped, somehow, that Valen's sacrifice had destroyed the thing, that his death had meant permanent victory rather than a temporary setback. Learning otherwise felt like a betrayal of his memory. "What do you need to know?" Theron sat across from her, his bulk making the standard issue chair look like a child's toy. "Everything. But specifically, I need to understand the corruption's vector. How it claimed the Space Marines in your squad. Whether it spoke to you. What it wanted." So Kara told him. She had told the story before many times, but never to someone like Theron. He listened with an intensity that went beyond mere attention. She could feel him probing the edges of her memory with his psychic abilities, gently testing, confirming, cataloging. When she finished, Theron was silent for a long time. "You understand what you survived?" he asked finally. "I survived because Sergeant Valen died." "No. I mean, you understand the nature of the corruption. What it was trying to accomplish." Kara shook her head. Theron leaned forward slightly, his expression grave. The entity within that Space Hulk was not simply chaos corruption. It was something older. Something that predates the fall of Cadia, perhaps even predates the Horus Heresy. A fragment of the dark age of technology, twisted and given sentience by millennia in the warp. "I do not understand." During the age of technology, humanity created machine spirits of incredible complexity. Some of those spirits achieved something like consciousness. When the age of strife came, when the warp storms isolated humanity, many of those machine spirits went mad. They were trapped in their ships, their stations, their hulls, watching their crews die, unable to help or escape. That madness, it made them vulnerable. And when the ships eventually tumbled into the warp, the entities there found them, infected them, transformed them into something new. Kara felt cold despite the climate-controlled environment. "You are saying the Space Hulk was alive. Truly alive." "In a sense. It had developed a kind of distributed consciousness across its fused systems, and it had learned patience. It did not simply want to corrupt or destroy. It wanted to understand, to grow, to become something that could exist in both the material realm and the warp simultaneously. A bridge between realities. Valen stopped it. Temporarily. His self-destruct damaged its core systems, forced it to retreat and heal. But it survived. And now it is trying again, more carefully this time. It has learned from its failure. The next crew that boards it will face something even more dangerous. Kara stood abruptly, pacing across the small bay. Then warn them. Tell them what happened. Tell them about Valen's sacrifice. Tell them. I will tell them everything you have told me. But Kara, you must understand something. The Space Marines who board that hulk next, they will likely die. Just as Sergeant Valen died. Just as Castian and Morton died. Because that is what Space Marines do. We die so others may live. It is not tragic. It is purpose. It is waste, Kara said quietly. Theron tilted his head, studying her. You do not believe that. I do not want to believe it. But I have watched good people die for goals that barely mattered, for missions that failed anyway, for principles that nobody remembers. At what point does sacrifice become suicide? At what point does duty become delusion? When you stop choosing it freely. Sergeant Valen chose his death. He looked at the situation, calculated his options, and decided that dying with purpose was preferable to living without it. That was not delusion. That was clarity. Kara wanted to argue, wanted to insist that there had to have been another way, but the words died in her throat. Because she had been there. She had watched Valen make his choice. And she had seen the peace in his actions, the absolute certainty that he was doing the right thing. Maybe Theron was correct. Maybe that clarity was the only victory available. What will you do? She asked. I will join the strike force being assembled to investigate the hulk. I will use what you have told me to prepare my brothers. And I will try to succeed where Sergeant Valen could not. By destroying it? By understanding it well enough to kill it permanently. The Imperium has exterminatus-grade weapons. If we can locate the Hulk's central consciousness, the core where its awareness resides, we can target that specific point. Vaporize it before it can retreat into the warp again. It sounded reasonable, logical, the kind of plan that might actually work. Kara hated it anyway because it meant more deaths, more sacrifices, more names added to books of the fallen. Theron stood, preparing to leave. At the doorway he paused. Sergeant Valen would be proud of you. You honor his memory by surviving, by continuing, by refusing to let his death be meaningless. His death was meaningless, Kara said quietly. The Hulk survived. It is killing again. Nothing he did mattered in the end. You are wrong. His death saved you, and you have spent years ensuring that others learn from what happened. You have turned his sacrifice into knowledge, into preparation, into a weapon we can use against the thing that killed him. That is not meaningless. That is legacy. After Theron left, Kara stood alone in the logistics bay for a long time, staring at nothing, thinking about legacy and memory and whether the difference even mattered. 3 months later, she received word that Brother Librarian Theron had died aboard the Space Hulk Mortis concatenation. The strike force had successfully located the core consciousness and deployed a cyclonic torpedo directly into its heart. The Hulk had been destroyed utterly, vaporized down to its component atoms, scattered across the void. 23 Space Marines had died to achieve it. Theron's name was first on the casualty list. Kara read the report 3 times, each reading leaving her more hollow than the last. Victory, the report declared. Decisive victory. The threat eliminated. Commendations issued. Honors bestowed. She wondered if Theron had felt the same clarity in his final moments that Valen had. Wondered if he had died satisfied, knowing his death accomplished something. Or if he had died screaming, terrified, regretting every choice that led him to that moment. The report did not say. Reports never did. That night, Kara broke her annual ritual. She went to the chapel, but instead of sitting in silence for 30 seconds, she spoke aloud. I do not know if you can hear me, Emperor. I do not know if you listen to people like me, or if you only care about your gene-forged warriors and your grand plans. But I need to say this. I need someone to hear it. Her voice echoed in the empty chapel, bouncing off sacred walls decorated with litanies she did not fully understand. Valen died for me. Theron died because of me, because I gave him the information he needed to find that Hulk's weakness. 23 Marines died because I survived. At what point does my survival stop being worth it? At what point do the deaths I cause outweigh whatever value I bring? Silence answered her. The Emperor, if he was listening, offered no guidance. I am trying to honor their sacrifices, trying to make it mean something, but I do not know how. I am just a logistics coordinator. I move supplies and file reports and make sure equipment gets where it needs to be. How does that balance against 24 dead space marines? Still nothing. Kara laughed bitterly. Right? You do not answer prayers. Valen taught me that. The Emperor protects, but only if you protect yourself first. Only if you make the choices that need making. She stood to leave, then paused. One more thing needed saying. Thank you for sending Valen when you did. Even if you did not mean to. Even if it was just coincidence. Thank you. The years continued. Kara aged while the space marines around her remained eternally youthful, suspended in their enhanced biology. She went gray at the temples, developed lines around her eyes, felt her joints begin to protest after long shifts. But she continued working, continued remembering, continued telling the story to anyone who would listen. She was 47 when the Imperium fell into the darkest days of the cicatrix maledictum. The Great Rift tore reality apart, splitting the galaxy in half, plunging entire sectors into permanent isolation. The Indomitable was on the wrong side of the rift when it opened. Suddenly, the ship was alone, cut off from Terra, cut off from supply lines and reinforcements and command structure. They had their oaths and their weapons and their faith, but they were fundamentally isolated in a universe that had become exponentially more hostile. The chapter master called an assembly of all personnel, space marine and human alike. Kara stood in the vast cathedral hall along with thousands of others, listening to the grim situation assessment. We are alone, the chapter master announced, his voice carrying through Vox amplifiers. The Astronomicon is silent. We cannot navigate the warp safely. We cannot contact Terra or receive orders. We must decide for ourselves how to proceed. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Fear, uncertainty, the kind of existential dread that came from realizing the galaxy's foundations had crumbled. The chapter master continued. Some of you will despair. Some will question whether we can survive. Some will wonder if the Emperor has abandoned us. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembly. He has not, because the Emperor is not a distant figure on Terra. He is the principle we carry in our hearts, the duty we choose every day, the decision to serve something greater than ourselves. Kara found herself thinking about Valen, about how he had made his choice in a place where the Emperor's light did not reach, where prayers went unanswered, where faith was all that remained. We will continue, the chapter master declared. We will fight. We will protect the worlds we can reach. We will hold the line against the darkness. Not because we expect victory, not because we believe we will survive, but because that is what we are. That is our purpose. The assembly erupted in cheers, a roar of defiance against impossible odds. Kara did not cheer. She simply stood there, understanding for the first time what Valen had understood. That survival was not the goal. Service was, duty was, the choice to keep fighting even when fighting was futile, because the alternative was surrendering your humanity to the darkness. In the months that followed, the Indomitable fought battle after battle against enemies that poured through the rift like poison from a wound. Chaos fleets, demon incursions, traitor marines who had been waiting centuries for this moment. The ship's human crew died by the hundreds. Space marines fell in numbers that would have been unthinkable before the rift. Every engagement was desperate, every victory Pyrrhic. Every day was a struggle just to maintain hope. Kara worked 18-hour shifts keeping the logistics network functional. She rationed supplies that should have been resupplied months ago. She juggled equipment shortages and personnel losses and the constant grinding pressure of knowing they were losing ground. But she never stopped telling the story. During brief rest periods, when crew members gathered in communal spaces, exhausted and demoralized, she would tell them about a space marine who had died to save a child. About 30 seconds that changed everything. About the choice to sacrifice rather than surrender. Some of them drew strength from it. Others dismissed it as mythology, a story too perfect to be true. But it gave them something to hold on to when everything else was falling apart. She was 51 when the Indomitable finally fell. A Chaos fleet ambushed them in the Thelos system, overwhelming their defenses through sheer numbers. The battle lasted 14 hours. By the end, the ship was crippled, venting atmosphere, its engines dead, its weapons exhausted. The chapter master ordered evacuation. What remained of the crew and space marines would scatter across the system in smaller vessels, trying to escape before the Chaos fleet finished them. Kara was assigned to an evacuation shuttle along with 30 other crew members and 2 wounded space marines. The shuttle launched just as enemy fire breached the Indomitable's hull, tearing through armor that had withstood centuries of war. She watched through a viewport as the ship died. Watched it break apart in a cascade of explosions, scattering debris across the void. Watched the end of the only home she had known for decades. The shuttle made it to the edge of the system before its engine failed. They drifted for 6 days before another Imperial vessel found them. By then, 3 crew members had died from injuries. The 2 space marines had fallen into SUS and membrane comas, their bodies shutting down to preserve resources. The rescuing vessel was a merchant ship, barely armed, hauling refugees from worlds consumed by the rift. Its captain took them aboard despite having no space, no supplies, no ability to support additional passengers. "We make room," the captain said simply, "because that is what we do." Kara recognized the sentiment. It sounded like something Valen would have said. The merchant ship limped from system to system, picking up survivors, dropping off refugees, barely staying ahead of the Chaos fleets that hunted them. Kara helped where she could, using her logistics training to maximize their limited resources. She was organizing a supply distribution when she overheard 2 young refugees talking. "My dad used to tell me a story," one said, "about a space marine who died to save some random girl. Said it proved the Emperor still cared about normal people." Kara stopped, listening. "That is just propaganda," the other replied. "Space Marines do not sacrifice themselves for civilians. They fight for the Imperium, not for individuals." No, this was real. The girl survived. She told people what happened. It is a whole thing. Kara approached them quietly. Both refugees were young, maybe 16, hollow-eyed from trauma. They looked at her nervously, probably expecting to be told to get back to work. "The story is real," Kara said softly. "I know because I was the girl." Their eyes widened. She told them the story one more time. Not the sanitized propaganda version, but the truth, the fear, the doubt, the moment when Valen could have saved himself but chose differently. The 30 seconds that felt like eternity. When she finished, one of the refugees was crying quietly. "Why are you telling us this?" the other asked. "Because you need to know that even when everything is falling apart, even when the darkness seems infinite, people still make choices that matter." Valen could have run, could have saved himself, could have decided that one child was not worth a space marine's life. But he did not. He chose duty over survival, and that choice echoes. But he died. The Hulk survived, killed more people. What did his choice accomplish? Kara smiled sadly. "It accomplished me. I am here because he died, and I have spent my life making sure his sacrifice was not wasted. I have trained crew members, optimized supply lines, kept ships functioning when they should have failed. How many people are alive because I did my job well? Hundreds? Thousands? Every one of them exists because Valen made his choice 30 years ago." The refugee who had been crying wiped their eyes. "That is legacy." Yes, that is exactly what it is. Kara lived for 7 more years aboard that merchant ship, helping it survive against impossible odds. She trained a new generation of logistics coordinators, teaching them not just the technical skills but the philosophy behind them. That every decision mattered. That every choice echoed. That service was not about glory or recognition but about the cumulative effect of small actions done faithfully. She was 58 when her body finally gave out. A combination of old injuries from the space hulk, decades of stress, and the simple wear of living in a war-torn galaxy. The merchant ship's medici did what they could, but they lacked the resources for serious intervention. Kara died in a small medical bay, surrounded by crew members she had trained. It was quiet, undramatic, the kind of death that would not be recorded in any official history. But before she died, she asked them to promise something. Keep telling the story, about Valen, about the choice he made. Do not let it fade. Do not let it become just another myth. Make sure people know that even in the darkest moments, even when everything seems lost, we still choose how we face it. They promised, and they kept that promise. The story spread, not through official channels or mini-storm sermons, but through word of mouth. Crew members telling other crew members. Refugees sharing it with other refugees. Guardsmen whispering it in trenches. A story about a space marine and a child and 30 seconds that changed everything. Some versions were accurate. Others added embellishments or changed details. But the core remained constant. That duty meant sacrifice. That service meant choosing others over yourself. That humanity's survival depended not on weapons or tactics but on the willingness to hold the line when the line could not be held. Decades after Kara's death, a young Astra Militarum soldier named Jarek heard the story in a trench on some forgotten world. He was 19, terrified, convinced he was going to die in the next assault. The story gave him just enough courage to go over the top when the order came. He survived that assault, and the next one, and eventually the war itself. Years later, Jarek told the story to his own children. They told it to theirs. The chain continued, each link adding to the legacy. Each telling preserving the memory of a space marine who had died to save a child, and the child who had spent her life honoring that sacrifice. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, where the Imperium crumbles and chaos rises and hope seems like a distant memory, that story continues to echo, because some things transcend death. Some choices ripple across centuries. Some moments of humanity matter more than entire wars. Sergeant Valen died in a corridor on a space hulk, fighting corruption he could not defeat, protecting a child he barely knew. His body was vaporized. His name was recorded in a book of the fallen that might have been destroyed when the Indomitable fell. No monuments were built, no great honors bestowed, but his choice lived on, in the hearts of people who heard the story and decided to keep fighting, in the actions of those who chose duty over survival. In the small daily sacrifices that held civilization together when everything else was falling apart. That was legacy, not victory, not triumph, just the quiet persistence of memory, the stubborn refusal to surrender humanity to the darkness. And in a galaxy that offered little else, it was enough. It had to be enough. Because sometimes, in the end, all we have is the choice we make and the hope that it matters to someone, somewhere, somehow. Valen made his choice on a space hulk during a single night that felt like eternity. Kara made hers over a lifetime spent honoring his sacrifice. And now the choice is yours. Will you remember? Will you tell others? Will you carry forward the understanding that duty is not about glory or success but about the willingness to stand in the darkness and refuse to yield? The galaxy does not care. The Imperium will not reward you. The Emperor may never acknowledge your service. But you will know. And that knowledge, that choice, that tiny act of defiance against the inevitable, might be the most human thing we have left. So choose. Every day. Every moment. Every impossible situation where running makes sense and staying means death. Choose to hold the line. Because 30 seconds can change everything. And sometimes a single night echoes for centuries. If this story connected with you in any way, if you felt that weight when Valen made his choice, then do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel. Not because I need the numbers, but because stories like this Stories that dig into what it actually means to serve, to sacrifice, to hold the line when everything is falling apart. These stories matter. They matter because the Warhammer universe is not just about big battles and cool armor. It is about people making impossible choices in impossible circumstances. And I want to keep telling those stories. The algorithm does not care about depth or meaning. It cares about clicks and watch time. But you care. I know you do because you made it this far. So help me fight the algorithm. Subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment about what Valen's choice meant to you. Because your engagement tells YouTube that this content matters, and maybe, just maybe, more people will find these stories when they need them most. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, the Emperor protects, but sometimes protection looks like sacrifice. Stay vigilant out there.